I have one question I have two questions that I would like all of you to answer. But then I would also, we have half an hour, and I would also like you in the panel, if you have questions for each other, that's very welcome, and we will also open up for the audience. So my question is about the interdisciplinary research and research collaboration. So I think all of you have worked more or less in interdisciplinary groups, and I would like each of you to think a little bit about, or to say what you think is most important to communicate to the audience about what have been the great benefits of that, and what have you learned? What has been sort of a really important experience for you as a researcher working in interdisciplinary collaboration, and also what are the key challenges? And then you can also have solutions to those challenges, if you have. Who wants to start? Karl can start.
Because I have least experience of this, but I think we haven't only worked with interdisciplinary issues because I'm not only a researcher, I work for an authority and with disease control, and also there we are very dependent on interdisciplinary work because of for disease control, as we've seen, not at least now in the last presentation, that we need to take into account passions and reason and the local context. So, so of course it's important in all kind of work, and the challenge is might be for example about communication, that we use different languages and that we don't really understand each other when we communicate.
Yeah, I would agree that the communication is the challenge, the main challenge, but also the main fascination, I would say. Even if you both share the same native language, if you come from different scientific disciplines, you may use the words differently, and especially if you come from different countries, so you don't share the same native language and you don't share the same sort of cultural history. It's a huge challenge. And it's the charm of it, but you need time. I think these projects need to allocate time to communicate. You need time to understand each other. You need to appreciate that you need extra time in each step to make sure that you understand each other correctly, that you don't just think that you understand each other, then you run off and start the study, and then it turns out that you used the same word, but you used it for different things, so you totally misunderstood each other, and you sort of have to go back and start over. So I think it's very, very rewarding, but it takes extra time.
I'd agree with all those points so far, all right. The challenge of being able to communicate your discipline in reasonably simple language is very challenging. Ideas from your discipline. And also I think expectations of what disciplines address and what they aim to achieve from their research. So just as an example, often people talked about this idea that there's in the social science they call it the deficit model, where if people had more information then they would behave differently. So often what we're given as a research question is we know what people, how can we give them this information to make it more palatable to them, rather than how can we combine the passions and compromise from both directions, and how can realizing that both disciplines have something to contribute, and it may challenge sort of what is aimed to be achieved from others. So for instance, if farmers see their animals in certain ways, and it's not just that they don't have enough information, they fundamentally don't want to do this, then how do you bring this back, and how do you reorientate what your goals are going to be between that? And if so, and maybe being self-critical from a social science point of view, we're not always oriented at finding solutions. Maybe, you know, it can be difficult to point out what's going wrong with this, but also coming up with, okay, how do we fix this is more difficult than saying, okay, this isn't why this is working. So combining goals and in a way that includes both disciplines, I think, can be challenging.
Yeah, no, I'm not really clear if the question was concerning compensation or culling, or if it was regarding having social scientists involved in the project. But both, yeah. Yeah, I can just say that concerning compensation, it's a really difficult issue, because it's not only about compensation, it's also about levels and about timeliness, and because there are examples where compensation has driven disease spread, because you get more money in a place if you have the disease than if you would sell a healthy animal on your market. So then you might bring diseased animals into a place or you have fake notification. So there are many issues with compensation that are difficult, but. I think that the main thing for people to notify is that there is some kind of incentives, that they feel that you get some help from the authorities. There is an example of Sardinia where they've had African swine fever since 1978, and they've had a compensation scheme all the time. But the farmers who are considered to be the main risk category of people, they are considered criminals because they keep pigs in a traditional way that they've done for hundreds of years, but they are called criminals, and so there is no trust between the authorities and the actors. So then it doesn't matter if you get compensation or not, I think. So it's difficult, I think.
We had another, you right?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I had two questions. Well, maybe a comment and two questions. And one comment is that in the last year and a half, I've started working at CEDA and going to a lot of sort of meetings where there was talk about financing research on health. And I've been really surprised by how often social sciences come up amongst the sort of medical scientists talking about we need to get social sciences involved in these projects and talking about how important it is. And sometimes I wonder how ready are social sciences to actually take that opportunity, because I think many times social sciences we're very good at critiquing or deconstructing, but then when it comes to sort of the practical negotiation of how do I fit my work into this group project, and sometimes our disciplines we aren't such team workers, we work more individually, whereas I mean in practice we often work less in teams than sort of in the veterinary sciences or in medical sciences, where you have a different kind of team structure to the research. So that's kind of a comment and a question. And then another thing I was thinking about in many of these presentations, and maybe I think about with the swine fever project. I think, Karl, you said that Uganda isn't so interested in the government doesn't really have a great interest or willpower to do something. And then I think when faced with that kind of situation, how does one then develop one's research so that in some way maybe that kind of interest grows? And I was thinking in Paul's presentation, I mean, you were talking about, somehow you contributed to getting pieces of paper plastered up on walls, and that's a fantastic outcome, actually, and something that's usually very difficult to do with a single research, and maybe it was special circumstances, but I mean, that's a great outcome in that kind of getting some sort of authority to buy into the research findings and do something with it. So a question there about, how in this swine fever project, I mean, what are the entries to get that kind of result, maybe at some point?
Yeah, when it comes to swine fever in Uganda, I wouldn't say that authorities are not, because authorities are interested, the veterinary authorities. but so it's higher up, because pig will never be a prioritized animal or high value in Uganda, at least not with the. So it depends on culture. So the president, he would never eat pork, even if he's not a Muslim. So he's a cattle man, and so cattle has a much higher value, and trade of cattle has a higher value than trade with pork. So I don't know if that is, of course, difficult to change that perception, I think. But also I think you have to see diseases like African swine fever, if it is actually a public good or is it private good. But to some extent it may be the interest is rather for the producers and the industry. And maybe you don't need the authorities in that setting. Even if the international legislation always focuses on the authorities. But I think maybe in Uganda it would be more relevant to work together with the industry and where the real benefits are to be found, I think.
Can I just make a comment on the difficulty of engaging social scientists in projects? I think the success rate in the past few years, I have tried to drag social scientists into my research project, and I would say that my success rate has been something around 25%.
Just on that as well, I agree that there can be a reticence within social science to engage with constructing, so we can deconstruct and comment on, like I was saying, Foucault's theories are often seen in a critical way and used in a critical way. And then how do you use them to add to what's happening, as well as deconstructing and telling a different story, and then being more hands-off. And in EPIC, we do work more multidisciplinary, so we don't do so much interdisciplinary. And from a career point of view, it's difficult as well. I did my PhD in bioethics and science and technology studies, and then I opportunistically took the job in the vet school because someone had left. They needed someone. I liked working, I'd done my master's dissertation on cattle. I was really interested. But it was a bit weird being the only social scientist in a vet. It was really fascinating, but I didn't quite know what I was doing there, for a long time. And I think a lot of people wouldn't have been comfortable, because being completely disconnected from your discipline. And now, I have a silo of papers in veterinary epidemiology journals, and I've one paper on animal health in social science, and they never get cross-referenced. The literature just doesn't talk to each other at all. And you have to learn a lot about epidemiology, which takes a lot of time, and I thankfully had some time. But people laughing saying, yes, we did agree on that. So it is difficult to write, and personalities getting on. I had a boss I really trusted and got on with well, so I think that was the reason I really enjoyed that job.
Maybe I should just add a little bit, because I think it's right that social scientists need a critical rethink about some of these issues. But then the question is, where are the places where you could get some serious change going? And so Orla's mentioned STS, for those of you who don't know, Science and Technology Studies. It's a kind of, in itself, it's a social science interdisciplinary project, because people come from all sorts of backgrounds, anthropologists, sociologists, economists, and so on and so forth. And I've never been directly engaged with STS. I don't think I've ever published in any STS journal, not to my knowledge anyhow. But I've got colleagues in my former group in Wageningen who were the people that I paid, as it were, to go and keep an eye on STS, and they would often drag me along to the events and discussions. And I must say, over the last 20 years, things have got a lot better. STS used to be populated by people. The one qualification was you really had to hate technology to do science and technology studies. And it came out of the 60s and 70s. It came out of nuclear protest. One of the most distinguished STS people was Brian Wynne, who was trained as a nuclear scientist and then he got sociology, and then he recanted all his nuclear engineering assumptions and went into a kind of very severe critical mode. But then he changed, and there was a most interesting study that he did in the early 1990s, or perhaps a bit earlier, it was after Chernobyl, when the sheep on the moorlands of Cumbria above his university in Lancaster started to glow green in the dark, and local sheep farmers wanted to know when they could get permission to sell their sheep again. And it then turned out, when they did the research properly with the nuclear engineers and the social scientists, that in fact it was pollution from the nuclear reprocessing plant on their own doorstep that was really the problem. It wasn't Chernobyl at all. And that led Brian into some very productive channels of engaging with Cumbrian sheep farmers on practical projects to actually protect their livelihoods. The publication, or the book, is called Sheep May Safely Graze, which I think is a wonderful title. But anyhow, it was a seminal piece of work in bringing up the practical relevance. So if I got a poster on a wall, okay, that's nice, but Brian actually did something about the Cumbrian sheep farming way of life. And I think that's a much more significant achievement. So at the end of the day, it's whether the STS people are changing fast enough, because they're one of the Noah's Arks in this, or Trojan horse, or whatever. There should be the... Anyhow, they're potentially capable of changing some of these attitudes. And I've seen over the last 20 years that there are now many sessions in STS conferences where the people that come are actually interested in positive technical outcomes. They're not just interested in critique any longer. So I think that message has been learnt to some extent, and we're beginning to see the benefit now that some serious social scientists are prepared to come out of their silo and work with scientists in all sorts of disciplines, developing the necessary understanding to be... You have to understand the passion of the others, and that means you've got to learn a bit of genetics, you've got to learn a bit of nuclear engineering, whatever it is. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time by... You know, Mary Douglas used to have this thing criticising anthropology. She said, you go to every interdisciplinary gathering she'd been to, and there was always one anthropologist at the back of the room who raised a finger and said, but it's different in my tribe. And she said, that is the worst kind of social science, the exception of one that tells us nothing. So I think the message is being received at the moment, and it is getting a bit better.
Did you see someone? Okay, good. Yeah. I have a lot to say, but I'm the moderator. But I was I could have said what Erin said. I think about that. Many of us as social scientists, we're so used to working alone, and we're so used to criticizing, and it creates difficulties in collaboration. And but I think also that we who work here at SLU, we really have an opportunity to collaborate, even if it doesn't happen so much. I think it should happen more, and we have social scientists at SLU that also need to approach the natural scientists. But and like Sanna said, it's not so easy to drag us out maybe sometimes. But I think we have good opportunities for collaborating when we're collaborating around concrete questions, like epidemiology or like agriculture in general, like many of us do research on. And we can find sort of a common thing to talk about in the actual situation, in whatever we are studying. If we're studying a disease, for example, we have some common ground there, which is a good start, I think. And I also think that we as social scientists can learn from the economists in being more positive. And because I have been a bit frustrated with that natural scientists only collaborate with economists because they give them numbers and they do what they ask, and they are willing to work as sort of facilitators of the natural scientists, I feel. And but I think we can learn something from that in being more positive towards collaboration across the disciplines.
I mean, we've had these discussions within SLU about social science, and sometimes when you say social science, the economists include themselves in social science, so this becomes a bit complicated again when you use the same word for different things. But we've had these discussions about the value of social science at SLU, and everybody agrees that there's a big value, there's a great value of having social science here. But I think that I can understand the argument that you don't want to be the isolated person sort of totally away from your discipline, and in the end you're some sort of alibi for, we have a social scientist here as our hostage, and that person is our social, sort of means that we are doing social science. So you need to have some sort of collaboration with your own discipline as well to grow in that discipline. You both want to work within your discipline and with other disciplines. So you don't want to do just multidisciplinary work, because then you end up sort of losing a bit of your own identity as a researcher.
So we're moving on to...
Yeah, just an add-on. It's an interesting discussion. I also think that there is an issue of how to publish when you are working in teams like this, and I would really like to see that in bigger universities that we step forward and not just subjugate ourselves to Taylor and Francis and other international publishers, but also try to invent and think broadly how to publish reports. And in a way, I myself have been doing some work on these kind of things, where you can publish a kind of research report, and then of course after that people can find ways of publishing individual papers on specific aspects. And also that could also open up, I would think, I don't know what other people think, but it could also open up for include the undisciplined friends of Paul, the people with no discipline, and find ways of also giving people the opportunity to publish, because I think that is a kind of a way of also decolonizing what we are doing. So thank you.
Does anyone in the panel want to comment? This was more of a comment, I think, but does anyone want to comment? Otherwise, I think this is a good time to stop, because it's been a very long day, and we have Swedish cinnamon buns and coffee and tea outside. But before that, we should give everyone a round of applause, and Alin has some gifts.